It's the second season back and the return of history for the Giro del Veneto, now in its 85th edition. For 160 kilometres in a change route today, starting from Padova and finishing in Vicenza. A couple of climbs to take on early doors, but the serious stuff starts about halfway through. A region that's characterised by short, sharp climbs or complete flat. We've got a mixture of both in this race. Up to Pirarolo, that's the highest climb of the day. Then we hit the finish line in Vicenza for the first time, and a couple of laps and circuits. Flying to Arcugnano, just under 3 kilometres at 5%. That'll be taken on twice before a finish on the flat for the last few kilometres in Vicenza. Another beautiful day for racing as the late season Italian classics continue. 21 degrees, sunshine, not too much wind about. Great conditions for professional bike racing. We had the last monument of the season in Italy at the weekend. A couple of races now to finish off, and this one has real history to it. It'd been off the scene for 11 long years since it was brought back last year by Filippo Pozzato. And look at this, Padova and its famous cathedral. Sant'Antonio, patron saint of the city. And a chance for everybody to have a look before they went up onto the podium to start the day. Well, Sant'Antonio said to protect travellers down the years. There'll be a few travelling 160 kilometres from start to finish today, hoping for a good outcome. Oh, the market was on. And the Veneto region, a region that belonged to ancient Venice, showing itself off as the end of the cycling season draws ever closer. Well, it's a region that lives the sport. Many of the famous bike brands come from the Veneto region, northeast of Italy. And just down the road from Venice itself, in Padova, where last year's race finished in this very square, won by Sandro Muresa, just his 5th victory of his career so far. This year, Cofidis here trying to take the title. We've got bike exchange with local rider Konishev. Luka Mezget's one to watch as well in a race like this, as riders turn up to ride the dreamland, as the organisers call it. Sefo Marca is here, looking for some late season success, and Alessandro De Marchi still hoping to find a new contract for next year. Lotto Soudal will become Lotto Destiny next year, but destined to wait for those invitations to big races following their relegation. And UAE Emirates with Matteo Trentin, who fought for victory in both of the Venetian Classics at the end of last season, back for yet more, with a really strong team backing him up. Formolo is a local boy. Ulisi from Tuscany at Astana, Kazakhstan, with Miguel Angel Lopez doing quite a bit of racing towards the end of the season. The post-Nibali era begins on Italian soil for Astana, Kazakhstan. Trek Segafredo have an Italian second sponsor, don't they? They're here with their United Nations type team and just about all over the world, looking for success on Italian soil. And here are last year's champions. But Sandro Muresa doesn't get to wear number 1 as defending champion. That has gone on the back of Mathieu van der Poel. He's turned up at the last minute, and suddenly they look a much more potent outfit. It's a really strong 6. They began at 12:15. Quite a late start for this time of year, but a shorter race today, 160 kilometres. We expect it to be highly contested and really well fought. Such warm conditions as well. 12th of October in northern Italy. Could be a lottery. Bike riders winning the lottery as far as the weather at the end of this season is concerned. almost all ready to go. Just over 2 hours and a quarter have passed since this scene. Monsieur Soup along for the ride. Total Energy have not had a good season, have they? A glimpse of the future in Swedish cycling as Tudor Pro Cycling are here. A team that's run by the former pro cyclist Fabian Cancellara. UNOX always competitive, and there we have it. Race start 6 minutes after they rolled out, and a really strong start with some big names following on, and others trying to put themselves into the shop window before it began. Early attacks from the likes of Timon Löderer of the Hrinkhoff team. Opportunity for some of the work service riders to try and get up the road. No Davide Rebellin attempting to get in the breakaway. He is just 2 races away from the end of his pro career. That's where we've been. This is where we are, approaching 100 kilometres ridden. And we have 3 of our 4 men who were in the original breakaway still out in front. Well, Andrea Pietro Bon of Eolo Cometa, already been in a couple of breakaways in Italian semi-classics this autumn. He was in the break, but he was dropped around half an hour or so ago by the rest of these 3 riders. Matteo Zurlo at the back there in that very famous jersey of the Zalf team, the 3rd Division development team, the red and white stripes with a green top. In the yellow, you've got Ludovic Robert, who's won big races from breakaways before, most notably in Flanders. And Matteo Vercher, 21-year-old from France, for Total Energy. Just under 67 kilometres remain. It is Robert, Vercher and Zurlo out front. There's a group at 1 minute and 40 seconds being led by Diego Ulissi, and the rest of the peloton at 1 minute and 53. We're heading now into some of the bigger climbs. You can see that Alessandro De Marchi is once again active, and still active at the end of this season. With me in the commentary box, it's Magnus Bäckstedt. Maggie, 66 Ks to go. Last year we saw a really aggressive race. It looks like we're starting to see the same here today.
Well, it's the kind of course that really lends itself to aggressive racing, isn't it? Lots of shorter, sharper climbs and a bit of flat in between as well for everything to regroup. So there are plenty of opportunities for everyone to go after this one today. But you know, when you start looking at this, the climbs aren't too long, and on the final circuit, it's only 2.8 kilometers at 4.5% that we got to deal with. So not super long climbs, but it's also not particularly far from the final climb to the finish line. So it's very much a possibility for an attack to make it to the line, and ultimately also for the sprinters teams to get together and bring it back for a bunch sprint.
The man at the front there in the yellow was once in a morning breakaway that didn't look like it had any chance of getting to the finish, certainly in a race like the Nokere Koerse in West Flanders. He got away, he won it. Is there any chance he can repeat the feat here today?
You never know, but I think Ludovic Robert has kind of made a name for himself doing exactly this, just getting into these early moves, and he does it very, very well. Tends to be the kind of rider that prefers this sort of steady, high power output and just plugging away, and I think a lot of people kind of opened their eyes a bit when he won Nokere Koerse and went, okay, we can't let him get too far again, because ultimately he kind of got one up on the peloton in that point.
This looks like a really strong group that's broken away from those behind. They've got around 15 seconds at the minute, but as you saw, it includes Diego Ulissi, Tesfazion, who's ending the season well for Drono per Androni Giocattoli. Bais is in there too for Eolo Cometa. And this is our first view now of what's left of the peloton. Still, we're seeing riders one by one coming off. You saw that Alpecin de Koning had Jay Vine and Nicola Conci in that first chase group. Behind here is Mathieu van der Poel, who surprised us all by announcing yesterday that he was going to ride on the road again.
Yeah, I didn't expect that, actually, that Van der Poel was going to get back on the road, especially after having sort of done the Gravel World Championships and done well there. Ultimately, the cross season is coming around, and it's been a long old year for him already. So I was a bit surprised to see him do that. But then again, you know, weather is nice and down in Italy already. Why not carry on and do another race maybe? And it might be that we're short on riders as well. But ultimately, I think the gap that we got here now is significant, especially with the riders in that we have in this breakaway. And you mentioned Tesfazion. I mean, I don't think I've been commentating on a single bike race that he's been racing on in the latter part of the year here now, where he hasn't made that significant breakaway, and you know, a really good one at that. It's just yet to be able to convert it, or been allowed to get close to convert it. But it seems to be picking up all these right sort of breakaways and moments with the right riders.
Well, this is Matteo Vercher at the back, French amateur champion. Come through the development squad at Total Energy. Of course, the Vendée U team, it's been around for a long time, the team based in the west of France, Jean-René Bernaudot. Still continuing to develop those young riders, which is really important, despite signing the likes of Peter Sagan and the big names, and maybe as well Sagan not producing the results perhaps this year that they expected when they signed him. So perhaps even more important to continue to develop those young riders.
I think it's always important to continue with development. You know, if you take your foot off the gas there, you're going to end up with a huge gap to fill, and not necessarily with the riders that you want to fill either. So and I think, like you said there, with Sagan not performing anywhere near to the level that they were expecting, and probably Peter expected himself as well, to be fair, it's even more important that they carry on doing this work.
Oh, Rochas, Demarchi, Balmer, all in this group. The two riders from Alpecin-Deceuninck I mentioned, Jay Vine and Nicola Conci. Ulissi has his teammate Trentin, and it's really good to see Demarchi. He's obviously riding in such an aggressive way to try and secure that continuation of his career. We've seen him rather like Tesfazion. You talked about this season. Demarchi in the last few weeks has been nowhere away at all from the front of the race. He's either been in the break or in these sort of secondary attacks.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you got a number on your back, there is an opportunity to showcase yourself and prove to excuse me, everyone around you that you still got it, you still deserve a contract. And I think Demarchi, you know, with the experience that he has, why wouldn't you sign him there? And he's clearly got a lot of legs left on him as well to work with. So I do hope, and I think that he will find somewhere.
Just 45 seconds now ahead of that group that's coming across the gap very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a group that's well organised. It's a group that has got some big names in it, and is in their interest to, I guess, you know, should we say, get rid of the likes of Van der Poel, and make sure that they get to the finish line without him. You know, ultimately, it's as soon as you bring in a rider like Van der Poel, and we saw at the Gravel World Championships that he's still in good form, then chances are that you end up getting beaten, and from a smaller group it's always easier to manage a result.
By my reckoning, we're coming up to the longest climb of the day, Pirarolo. Comes at just over 60k. There we go. 4.5 kilometers long. Maximum gradient of into the double digits, which is normal. They're sort of shorter, sharper climbs in this region. But there are sort of a couple of false flats on the way up. You can see the average goes down to below 4%. Lots of changes of rhythm then for this group to try and stay out there.
I guess you could say it's basically falls flat with a steep ramp in the middle.
Welcome to the Veneto.
Exactly.
It's either pan flat or something like this, isn't it? And narrow roads as well. It isn't quite Flanders, but they are very particular, the climbs in this region. It has its own identity in terms of geography and topography, as well as, you know, the cultural heritage and aspect too. Solid stuff this from Alpecin-Deceuninck, and Conci trying to build the gap. So 3 riders still up the road. Zurlo, who is 24 now, but he's still in the Zalf setup. And that's Vertier, I mentioned, French amateur champion, 21 years of age. And this is Robert, most experienced of the 3 riders. Winner of Nokere Koers. Good 18 months ago now. Biggest moment in his career, without a doubt. Probably the biggest moment in this team's existence, you'd say, as well.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, they've had some good results through the years, but I mean, Nokere Koers has really gone from being almost a kermesse race back in the day when I was racing it to a highly regarded bike race, and they changed courses over the year, and it's gotten harder and harder with a significant amount of cobblestone in it. So I would say you're right on that. It's probably the biggest win of in the team's existence.
Ponchi and Vine swapping off turns. Vine, it is doing the damage on this part of the climb. And we saw him doing plenty of damage at the Vuelta on the climbs as well. Movement in the group at the front. Zurlo looking stronger than his companions. Making a move for it. Trying to be the last survivor. Trying to get to the top, and if he does that, he could survive in any attacking group for quite a bit longer. There's a bit of descent and then flat coming after this.
It's interesting that he's pushing on that hard right now, because ultimately with that group coming up behind them, you feel that maybe as long as they're over the steep section of this climb, it shouldn't be too difficult to be able to follow and carry on with that group. And ultimately you can always pull that card where you go, well, look, I've been in the breakaway all day, so I'm just going to sit on the back of this one. And I don't think too many of these guys would have too many issues with that, at least for 10 kilometers or so.
$60 kilometers to go. 38 seconds back to this group. They have around 40 seconds on the group behind them, the main peloton. Number 55 there is Remy Rochas. You're seeing Alessandro De Marchi. Arm up, a little unhappy about something. And behind him, Miguel Angel Lopez. Not been in his best form, has he, towards the end of this season, but he's been aggressive, he's been fighting, he has been the Miguel Angel Lopez that we enjoy watching. Aggressive and entertaining, despite maybe not always being at his best.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He's looked like he's been lacking a little bit in terms of legs. When he's got himself into the right groups, he just hasn't had the legs to finish it off in those groups. But it is the end of the season ultimately, and it's difficult sometimes to keep the form and to keep the motivation and everything that goes with that. But I guess in his head he's still good because he keeps on making all these right moves. It's just that the body can't quite carry him through it and get him to the end and get a big result out of it.
The peloton itself is thinning out quite extensively now, isn't it? Really been whittled down.
It looks like there's been a bit of a response from the peloton as well, because that gap to the chases has come down somewhat. And I think rightly so if you're looking at the riders that we have in that group chasing the 3 riders here. It's a strong one, and it's got some real potential winners installed in that group. So if you're a team that's missed it, and potentially if you're thinking that we got a sprinter that's fast enough to win this today, then you got to react to it now.
There's the odd fast rider, isn't there, on the start list? Of course, starting with Mathieu van der Poel. Not a pure sprinter, but more than fast enough, as he's proved throughout his career. Luca Mesquets would be one of the pure fast men in this, if he could climb with the very best. And looking down, there's a whole host of riders who are there or thereabouts. Brian Cocard, Davide Cimolai as well, who's on home roads, let's not forget. He's recently become a Prosecco maker himself. This is Prosecco country. So we see Matteo Zurlo, another home rider, by the way, just down the road in Bassano del Grappa. Famous for another spirit. Stronger stuff that he might be able to finish the season with if he pulls off a big result here. Maybe to digest all the celebratory cake he can have. These were his companions in the breakaway. Verchel at the back there, and Robet just in front of him. No gap to these guys yet. Next group at 38 seconds, though. You imagine they can't be too far behind as Verchel looks back. Motorbike prepares to try and get past them. And there they are. So at around 32nd, these two. 35 to the next group. And the peloton, well, they were getting closer, weren't they? It's gone to 1 minute 25 again.
I'm not sure the GPS is 100% reliable at this point, because it seems like it's jumping up and down an awful lot.
Yeah, quite a few changes, aren't there?
Yeah.
Half a minute. That's what it's telling us, as we see Trentin and Ulissi driving this group on. De Marchi now comes through, trying to get something to eat quickly. And here is Miguel Angel Lopez as they come over the top now. Over the top of Pirarolo. This is the climb they only take on once, by the way. They'll now head on undulating terrain for the next 10 kilometres. And once they do that, they'll be on the flat on the way into the finish line in Vicenza. I was about to say Padova then, but that's where we started from today. Beginning in Padova, heading up into the north, into Vicenza, right at the foot of the hills. And then we'll head back up into the hills, 2 circuits, taking on the Arcugnano climb on a couple of occasions. That's around 3 kilometres long. 4-5% average. Again, ramps, very, very changing gradients. And as we look at a changing size of the peloton, it was never going to be huge, this group, at this time anyway, because we only had 116 riders on the start list today. 6 riders per team for 19 teams, so not the biggest peloton. This is a second division race, remember. The World Tour racing in this part of the world was done last week, wasn't it, with the final monument and the Giro di Lombardia on European roads. These are a couple of events to dot those I's and cross those T's as we say goodbye to 2022 in a road racing sense. And Matteo Zurlo is doing it in impressive style. Nice thing as well, racing for one of the smaller teams, I guess, is pressure's somewhat off. It's the pressure you put on yourself, but I mean, no one's looking at Matteo Zurlo to win, are they?
No, they're not, and he's just out here really to try and prove, put down a good ride and do a good performance more than not necessarily a result out of it. And he's doing that today. There's no doubt about that, and has got himself a decent little gap here.
Verchel and Robet have been absorbed by the second group now. 27 seconds. Peloton still at a minute and a half as Trentin descends. Trentin driving them on. And this is the man they're chasing on the left-hand side. I guess we're at a stage now where this group's probably more concerned about the gap behind the peloton than the one in front. They're not really worried about Zurlo too much, because I think that'll take care of itself, won't it?
I think you're right. He's got 55 kilometres to do here, and going on your own for that length of time, I mean, it would require a pretty special ride, let's put it that way. And not saying that it is impossible to do, but it would be a spectacular performance if he was able to hold the group off as he starts fatiguing a little bit. And as long as the riders behind here continue to ride together and keep on working, which they will need to do to continue building that gap on the peloton, they should catch him sooner or later anyway.
It's nice to have this race back anyway, isn't it, whatever happens. And before we get to the real sort of nitty-gritty of the end and the final circuits. This is an historic race from the 85th edition. When you look down at the palmarès, some huge names have won here in the past, and one man who's racing actually, Davide Rebellin, who'll retire on Sunday, won it 3 years in a row towards the end of the last century. Did you ever race this?
I never did, actually. I never did. I tend to finish off the season a little bit earlier, but it was always one of those races that, yeah, you had an eye on, and ultimately, like you said, there's been so many big names winning over the years, and it was a big vital part of the Italian racing calendar, and it was very unfortunate that they sort of disappeared for 10 years, and good on Pippo Pozzato for bringing it back to life again and getting it going.
Well, finishing in Vicenza this year, it's just down the road from his own hometown of San Drigo, actually, so he's brought the race literally home for this one, and it has a relationship with all the way back to the golden age of Italian cycling. I mean, the second ever year, Costante Girardengo was the winner. He then won for 4 years in succession. There was Alfredo Binda winning it earlier in his career. Fausto Coppi on at least 3 occasions. Firenzo Magni was the winner as well of this particular race too. And then when you go to sort of more modern era, you can see already back Argentine. Chandri, who's a sports director now, of course, he was the winner of this race. Rebellino, I mentioned, the likes of Di Luca and Simoni, the big Italian names of the noughties. And well, the race did finish 3 years from its last edition. Filippo Pozzato was the winner in 2009. Last year, the first ever Belgian winner since Roger de Vlaming was Sandro Meurice. And well, the riders that the host broadcasters would like us to follow on the left-hand side, star ratings for the likes of Cimolai, for Marca, and there is Meurice. Not yet won since he took victory here last year. And Ulissi, always a man to look out for, the winemaker from Cecina in Tuscany, in that group chasing on. This is the head of the race with Matteo Zurlo, and we're inside the final 55 k's now. He's holding his advantage really well.
Yeah, he is actually. But it's going to take a big effort to maintain this, and maybe he's putting too much of an effort in already at this point in the race to stay out here on his own. You know, if you're thinking of scoring a result out of this, and I guess at some point soon his sport director probably should have a bit of a word with him and say, look, back into this group, because they got a minute and a half on the peloton, and they've been building for a while now, so it looks like it's a safe bet to drop back into this, and it's likely to go really far, possibly all the way to the finish line. So rather than spending all the energy to sit 30 seconds ahead of these guys, just ease off a bit, drift back in here, rest, recover, and see what we can do in the final.
24 seconds then for Zurlo. I wonder what information he is getting from his sports director. This is Vercher sitting on the back for Total Energy. Interesting mix of a team for them here, like of Soup and De La Parte with the experience. Joussoum, who we've seen attacking races to real effect in the last few weeks. And then Vercher here, trying to make a name for himself. Already going to be a professional from the start of next season, so this is a rehearsal really for the stagiaire. He's already signed that 2-year contract that is mandatory at the top level when you begin your career. And once again, going to have to rely on invitations to races though, Total Energy next year. All of that is going to settle down, isn't it, in the next couple of weeks, and everybody will start to realise what's going to happen with, you know, who's in a Grand Tour, who isn't, whether any riders have clauses in contracts and things like that to get out of them if they're not on the world team status.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a flurry of transfers happening in the next week or two, but at the same time, you know, for some of the teams that have got relegated or are in that level, you know, it's important to keep hold of those riders as well. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting times to see who does what and how. And, how it changes life for some of the teams, especially the likes of Lotto Soudal. What's their program going to look like? Are they going to change anything, or are they going to continue, considering that they are the highest ranked team below the sort of relegation line? You expect them to continue having all the invites that they want. So are they then going to continue riding all of the World Tour races, or are they likely to pick and choose a little bit and play a different game going forward, especially next year, and then see what happens?
Relegation, if you're still that top team outside of the World Tour, doesn't mean an awful lot because you're guaranteed the invitations, and as you say, you can pick and choose, but it's a fine line, isn't it? You have one bad season then and you're no longer the top team, and you no longer get those automatic invitations. There's no security there, so they need to up their game and go in search of those points. They do need to ride a certain number of races.
Well, they have to ride quite a big program still, and continue to perform as if they were a World Tour team. And it's a bit like you see what Alpecin de Koning have done over the last couple of seasons, really. Just keep on winning bike races, left, right and centre, whatever level it is at. Just keep on plugging away and scoring big points.
Conversation there between Matteo Trentin, the former European champion, and the man who was in the breakaway, Verchel. Just asking if he'll contribute to riding a little bit. And Verchel, not easy thing to do when you're a young rider up against somebody like Matteo Trentin, but being able to maybe relay those little bits of information that you've been given. Well, I'm told not to work, sorry mate, I'd love to, but he's telling me I can't. Yeah,
exactly. And it's probably I think Matteo Trentin will understand the position that Verchel is in. If he's been told that he can't work from his sport director, then he just will not do that. Whereas a rider that's a bit older, has got his sort of stature within the sport, would possibly think a bit more about it. So it was just leaning on him a little bit to see, okay, are you going to do this or not? And the sport director said no, and then that means no. So I think Matteo realized quite quickly that I'm not going to try anything with this guy.
Zurlo's still just out in front, but they can almost see him now as they start the S-bend coming down the hill. And they're actually on the circuit already here. This is the descent from the hill that they're going to climb twice. The long climb, Pirarolo, actually just took them over onto the plateau there without taking them up the hill that they're going to take on.
Yeah, and from this moment, the moment they get down onto the flat, it's not that far to the finish line. You're looking at what, 4 or 5 kilometers, something like that.
It's an interesting circuit, isn't it? And I was going to come on to this, given, depending on what situation we had, is just take a look back at Zurlo here. That's where he almost overcooked it on that bend. He is, of course, trying to push things normal where he is in the race right now. But
I'd say that was using the road to its full potential.
There you go. Much more generous assessment from the man, at least, who knows what he's talking about. 10 seconds then for Zurlo. He's starting to lose it. I mean, that's not a surprise, is it? What could be interesting in terms of surprise is how to watch it. It's how different riders play it, because this is a group. Imagine they stay out here. This is a group with all kinds of different abilities, strengths, weaknesses, and this climb coming really late into the lap. The top of the first bit of the climb is at 10 k's from the finish, and then we've seen there's a couple of little ramps that they go up. The proper climbing itself is done maybe with 6 k's to go, and then that descent, full 5 k's on the flat. It's possible to attack and win this, isn't it, if you're strong enough?
I definitely think it is, and push the boundaries on the descent there as well, or ultimately just as you come down onto the flat, when everyone starts looking around at each other, come from a little bit further behind, lay off the back a bit and take a runner at it, and at that point it's still possible to get to the line on your own.
Wow. Monteberico. Very, very special indeed. The views in this part of the world over the little hills as well, quite particular, quite peculiar. You'll see vineyards on short, steep slopes. Not quite like the rolling hills of Tuscany or over in the Marche that we're used to seeing as well. This is very different topography. You've got all those traditional bits of Venetian architecture as well. It all looks very different. The towers are a big feature, aren't they, of going around this area. Zurlo is 47 kilometers from the finish here, but he's about to hit the finish line for the first time. Don't think he's going to get there on his own, though. He's going to be part of a group, I think. We're just 8 seconds behind him. You can see that Bike Exchange are involved with Alexandre Balmer, Swiss rider. And here they have him. Zurlo finally caught. Good ride from him, though. He'll certainly have seen a few people open their eyes and have a look at him. Again, 24 now. It's about the sort of time that you want to be stepping up.
It's starting to push the limits of that, I think, as well. As the riders are getting younger and younger when they're getting signed for the bigger teams, you really want to make that step up at least into the middle tier by the time you're about 23 years old.
This is the group at the front then. Around 15 riders, roughly. Maybe a few more. Andres Kron in this group, such a strong rider. Maybe in the mould of Tesfatsion as well. Good climber stroke sprinters. Ulissi would certainly belong to that family, as would Matteo Trentin. Possibly more at the sprinty end of it rather than the climby end.
Yeah, I mean, they don't go bad uphill, do they? Especially Ulissi.
And for a man who doesn't go bad uphill, Miguel Angel Lopez, he had a big weekend out, didn't he? Riding Giro di Lombardia and then the gravel worlds. A good 450 kilometres or so, all of it on gravel.
Yeah, that is a big weekend by anyone's account, I think.
Velo Cometa with Davide Bais in here. Go from Mallorca all the way to Berlin. Then we'll head to that same velodrome where we're having the World Championships this week in Saint-Quentin-des-Yvelines. And then to London for 2 nights to finish off at the Pringle. Into Vicenza, back on the road. And into what will be the final few hundred metres. Peloton behind starting to gain some traction and some ground on this flat section. We're 43.5 kilometres from the finish, and we're approaching our first passage of the finish line at the Giro del Veneto. It's the second season back of the return of history. Ride the dreamland, as the organisers say. Well, Sandro Møriser was in dreamland last year when he won. Great way to end the season for him and Alpecin de Koning. And we've got those who are trying to take the trophy this year in the attack right now, and it's full of big names. Ulissi and Trentin, just 2 of them. But they've only got 55 seconds now on the rest of the peloton. In that peloton, Mathieu van der Poel, who's turned up quite surprisingly to race. There are 2 laps to go. 21.3 kilometres each circuit and 1 big climb. The climb topping out at around 10 k's to go, with some undulating terrain for 5 k's after that. A drop down and then on the flat into the finish. How's this one going to play out, Magnus?
Well, anyone's guess, but with the peloton coming back and having brought just over 30 seconds back on this breakaway group that we have here, it's I think still a little bit of an advantage to the peloton, because when you're looking at the intensity that is been put into to the riding at the front in the front group here. You know, they're rolling through nicely together, but it's not like you can see that they're not giving it everything that they have, and sometimes if the group is slightly too big, then you end up with this sort of hesitant type of riding. It's still rolling along nicely, don't get me wrong, but it's just not driving it hard, and that's very difficult to change. So I think if they have aspirations of taking this to the line, they really need to split the group on the next climb and ideally half it, and carry on from that moment on, because then you end up with some very committed bike riders who believe that, okay, this is a good enough result. If I go with this to the line, even if I finish last, that's a decent result. And I think you kind of need that level of thought in all of the riders' heads, that, okay, worst case scenario, I end up with this, I'm happy with that, let's carry on, and that's when you really get that full gas effort.
Trentin pulling this with Balmer, the Italian and a man from across the mountains in Switzerland. Tuscany's top rider Diego Ulisina at the front. Tremendous palmarès down the years, not quite as prolific as he was as the years go by, and the sport maybe changes a little as well. And Miguel Angel Lopez on his wheel with Tesfazion up there, Eritrean rider who's based, I was going to say in Italy, but in San Marino, so surrounded by Italy, in an Italian-speaking nation, one of Europe's smaller nations. And of course he rides for an Italian team. There's Daniel Tesfazion. He's one rider who could be transferring next year, given the sad uncertainty really around Ronop and Androni Giocattoli. The team boss Gianni Savio has already said that his riders are free to look elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the first time I think I've ever heard that from Savio, and it's a real shame, because it's a team that's been around for such a long time, and they've always produced very, very good bike riders, and you know, being competitive everywhere that they go, and especially, you know, super aggressive in the Giro, and in the Italian Cup races. You know, they've been winning that one pretty much every year for as long as I can remember, and put a real big emphasis on that to then get the automatic invite to the Giro the following year. So it would be a real shame to see them disappear off the list of professional teams.
One thing that Savio and his teams have done so well down there has been develop talent around the world, not just in Italy. They've developed some really good Italian talent. Here's one of them on the screen, actually.
Yep.
Alessandro De Marchi, who turned professional with Dronopper, was Androni Giocattoli, Serramenti PVC, I think, back in the day when he would have joined the team.
And
add a few different names onto that.
Yeah, I was going to say Dick with Giovanni was in there as well.
There you go, yes.
Serramenti, I can't remember.
There were a few sponsors.
But I think that sorry, Rob, that vast list of sponsors that they had, and it was probably one of the most highly populated, you know, sort of logo dense jerseys, should we call it, in the professional peloton. But because they had, you know, 100 sponsors on that jersey, if they lost one or two of them, it wasn't a massive gap to fill, and they could just kind of look for another 20, 30, 50,000 euros to plug that gap, and that was easier to do rather than going out and find one 10 million euros sponsor, and I think the model really worked for them for a long period of time. It's only in recent years that it's been a bit more difficult, and maybe it's the way the economic climate is. This sort of medium-sized businesses that they had as their sponsors have been the hardest hit by the financial difficulties that the world has had with the COVID pandemic and so on.
He's put together a lot of riders from the Americas, South America, particularly Venezuela and Colombia developed a lot of riders. Of course, Tesfatsion coming from Eritrea. They've been riding a lot of the upcoming African races in the last few years and helped taking big-name riders over to the likes of Tour of Rwanda, which they've taken victories in. Tesfatsion himself was the winner of that race in the general classification this year. But again, they've not neglected their home country. They've brought through the Italian riders too, won the Italian races. Tesfatsion winning a stage in this region in the Serenissima, the Adriatica Ionica race this year. Yeah, there'll be a team who will be missed, certainly by riders from all over the world looking for a way into the sport. Again, not one of the top teams, and they never have been, but they have helped develop certain riders. Here is Nathaniel Tesfatsion. The 23-year-old from the Eritrean capital, Asmara. And he's in a group that started working a little more successfully together now. I'm sure the gap has been communicated and they've started to increase it on the flat, which is where they were losing it before, to 1 minute and 11 seconds. They've gained about 15 seconds or so ever since they came through that finish line. They're heading out to the climb again. Maybe had the trend continued, they could have been struggling here and maybe waited for that splitting up of this group on the next climb. It might still come, certainly if riders want to make a stronger group that's more cohesive, but they've helped each other, they've recovered. Not with everybody contributing, but there's been enough riders contributing and working hard enough to increase that gap again, and we're talking 1 minute and 12 now.
Yeah, it's increased by a bit, but not enough, I don't think, for them to feel comfortable that this is going to go to the line.
It's been a while since we had a look at the peloton, but this is the lead group still. Jay Vine's been committing a lot for Alpecin-de-Koning. Balmer, you saw Bais come through and take a turn there. You've also seen lots of the UAE riders, with Trentin and Ulissi, riding for one of the most successful teams in the sport. 47 victories on all fronts this season for UAE Emirates. Trentin himself taking one pretty recently, actually, in Luxembourg. You and I were watching that day, Magnus.
Yeah.
Ulissi, well, he hasn't won since the Tour du Limousin, just before the Vuelta a España. They've done it at all levels. Remember last weekend with Tadej Pogacar. They as a team will end their season in Langkawi in Asia and at the Veneto Classic on Sunday in this very region. Of course, this is the old race that was brought back by Filippo Pozzato. Veneto Classic is the brand new race that was born at the same time. And that, of course, had its first edition last year. This year, we'll try and solidify what was a fantastically aggressive race we saw again at the end of last season. Looks as though we've had a bit of reaction again from the peloton. Without having a look at it, we've not been able to see that group for a while now on our screens, but it's a minute. This is Nicola Conci onto the wheel there of Alessandro Tonelli, and they're starting to leave gaps here in this group.
It's looked a bit like this on and off for a while now, with riders not being 100% happy or committed. And I think it's still that the size of the group and the fact that we've still got 2 more climbs to go. So if you're not feeling super in this group, then you're going to start sitting on the wheel, trying to miss a few turns. And as soon as there's a few riders missing turns, then everyone starts backing off a fraction just to save a little bit of legs. And yeah, that's never a good thing if you're trying to build a time gap to a peloton.
And 3 passengers you would imagine still from that morning breakaway as well there in Zurlo, who's with Vercea and Robert. This is the of the towers, I was going to say that's plural, Torri d'Arcugnano. Beautiful old square there as well, take a look at that. symbolic of the region. Arcugnano itself is around 3 kilometers to climb. And we should be heading on to it now. See the road starting to go uphill on the right-hand side. Average gradient of around 4.5%. Takes us back up onto the plateau where they descended from around, what is it now, 15 kilometers ago. So there you have it, we're climbing.
Yep. It's good to see Jay Vine back in the game again as well. After, well, in my book, he was probably the man of the Vuelta after Remco. You know, the spectacular rise that he had, and obviously picking up 2 stage wins as well. Yeah, just great to see him back on his bike again after taking that horrible crash that he took and ended up having to quit the Vuelta. And it's not easy coming back into the game again after, especially this late in the season. It tends to be very difficult to recover from an injury and find your legs again and be competitive in the races this late in the year.
Very outspoken about the economic sacrifices that he and his partner had made to come over from Australia and dedicate the time to being a professional cyclist. Of course, had his reward in terms of what he won. Interesting to see if he's going to be a different rider now, as his teammate Nicola Conchi's on the front.
I hope it doesn't change his way of riding just yet. Anyway, hopefully he'll grow into being a GC contender by the attacking style of riding that he currently has. But I think as soon as he starts looking at GC and trying to ride a high GC placing, let's call it, it tends to be that the riders are more following wheels than going for stage wins and really racing full gas every day. And personally, I really like the way that Jay rode the whole of the Vuelta, really. You know, always looking for opportunities and obviously pulling a couple of them off in a spectacular fashion. That to me is great bike racing. It's great to watch. And I feel that if he is to start looking at the GC, then he's going to have to rein that back in a bit.
Even if he doesn't go in that direction just yet, of course, I think we know him. He probably has the physiology for it. He's shown that in both winning the Zwift Academy with the sort of physical tests we all saw the results of, and what he's done in the mountains at the Grand Tour. But, you know, mentally it's very different. Of course, there's the repeated physical efforts over 21 days, which you don't really know until you try and stay up there. But, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he goes. He'll certainly be watched now a lot more, and you'll know that after you won your first Grand Tour stage, whether you're going for the GC or stage wins, that he'll certainly be taken account of now by other teams.
Yeah, it's definitely a different level of attention paid on to a rider once they take a couple of wins in a Grand Tour, and you tend to not give them as much of a leash as well to go off on these breakaways and win stages from there, because ultimately you just don't know how good they're gonna be. And I think with a rider like Jay Vine, he showed until he had that crash that it was actually competitive on a lot of the days. Even when he wasn't winning, he was still not too far off the mark. And I think with that, they're probably going to be a fair few teams, I would suggest, and if they're not thinking about it, they should do that. You don't want to give him at least not a couple of minutes head start, because are you going to catch him?
Peloton still not looking like they're going to catch this group yet. 59 seconds, it's coming down but slowly, as Vine himself is on the front now. Robert, you mentioned he likes just keep putting the power out. He's already in the morning breakaway and he's now contributing.
He's an interesting rider, Robert. You know, really good at these kind of breakaways, but just not quite explosive enough, I feel, to maybe win a stage or a race from a smaller group. If he was able to, if he had that bit better sprint, then you know he could really be a part of a group like this and be fairly confident that he's going to pull a lot more results out of the bag. But he's a type of rider who really needs the solo breakaway to succeed, to pick up the win.
Getting towards the top of this climb. Saw from the graphic early on the maximum gradient's about 8.5% here, but lots of changes in gradient as they get towards the top. There's a big crowd on this circuit as Matteo Trentin drives this one on now. Cron on his wheel, De Marchi third wheel, and you have Ulissi, who's Trentin's teammate. And this is Tesfazion. Vercher just behind him. Or just in front of him, I should say. Balmer is there as well. Zorlo hanging on brilliantly in this group too. Arcugnano and the view from the top. Now 3 or 4 kilometres sort of across this plateau, up and down ever so slightly, and from what I can see there are 2 little ramps before we start the descent proper.
Yep. Typical of this part of the world, really. You end up riding on the top of that ridge for a number of kilometres before you turn down, so few opportunities to attack later on.
Well, we haven't seen the peloton for a long time. Television pictures from the host broadcasters haven't given us an image for the last 20 minutes or so of the peloton. But I can tell you, I'm getting news that Stefano Oldani, Mathieu van der Poel, Marco Tizza and Davide Cimolai have climbed off. They are no longer in the race. So Alpecin de Koning in particular will be desperate for this front group now to succeed, because 2 of their stronger riders behind, Oldani and Van der Poel, have climbed off. Of course, they still have Sbaragli and Murisa, who was the winner here last year, back in the group behind.
Interesting. Very interesting that they've climbed off.
And Davide Cimolai as well. It'll be disappointing for him. Of course, he's a local.
Yeah, I wonder why that is then.
Been a while since Cimolai has produced his best form. So to be fair, I think since he moved over to Israel Premier Tech, even before, Cofidis wasn't exactly on top form. Certainly nothing like the Lampre days when he was winning stages in Catalonia and things like that. Settled into more of a helper role, that's fair to be said as well. All about his own results, but today's not his day, I'm afraid. Davide Cimolai climbing off. Just inside 30 k's to go through the litter zone. And this is Ulissi. And I wish I could tell you the full composition of the peloton as well behind, but we're just not getting an image of it, I'm afraid.
No.
We know that there are 57 seconds between this group and the peloton. And these are the beautiful, beautiful images up front. Certainly no taking away anything from that. Stunning.
I think if the breaker managed to get to this point next lap with the same advantage, then it should be fairly certain that they're playing for the stage win. And so the question is, who's in the bunch, and who's, based on the number of teams, different teams that we have in this group here, who's left to ride, who's there to chase?
Little gaps opening up again here. Bit of after you, sir, going on behind. And Angel Lopez closes the gap. Again, this is one of those little ramps we talked about. Ahead of the race, Jay Vine, Nicola Conci, Lopez, Trentin, Ulissi and Kron. And the 6 riders I just mentioned, they're joined by Rochas, De Marchi, Balmer, Tonelli, Robet and Tesfazion. Zurlo, Vercea and Bais are there. 15 riders at the front. Off we go back onto the descent then. That second of the ramps out the way. A reminder, once they're down the bottom, there's that flat section. And then they'll head to the finish line. Now this is the section, once they got to the bottom, where the gap started to reduce, didn't it, the last time? It looks like the same's happening here, if we're to trust the time gap. 48 is the gap, 48 seconds. So somebody still must be working hard behind, even though we can't quite see who it is yet. No,
I guess the one team that has missed out of this is Trek Segafredo. So and Cofidis ultimately. No, Cofidis has got one rider up here, but Trek Segafredo haven't, and probably one, from the international teams, and it's probably the one team that really has a bit of pressure to still perform here in Italy, where one of the headline sponsors is Italian, and it is an important part of the year for the sponsor.
Trek Segafredo, some solid riders here. And Brustenga as well from Catalonia. He's been impressive in the Spanish youth levels. .51 seconds as Balmer moves on. Bike Exchange, we know, have some strong riders in the group behind. And looking down to Vicenza, where the sunshine has gone in for the moment. Still a pretty nice day. High clouds around. And a good chance for us to have a look around the hills and that sanctuary again of Monte Berico. Typical Venetian tower there. Well, if you were watching the Gravel World Championships at the weekend, this is where they climbed to at the start. It's on the gravel path and the cobbles on the other side of the road where they're descending now. Lightning fast descent down here.
Very, very quick.
Once they're down the bottom, it really is just a handful of kilometres to the finish. There we go, 65 k's an hour. I'd suggest maybe even more.
I would suggest it's more than that.
Certainly looked it, didn't it? Conci and Vine now with Van der Poel and Oldani back in the bus with their feet up watching on the telly. They are under pressure to do something. Remember, Alpecin de Koning took the win last year with Sandro Meurensen, the 30-year-old from Flanders.
From Kortrijk.
From Kortrijk, exactly, yeah. He's said to be back in the bunch at the moment. He has Christian Sbaragli with him, but you'd suggest at the minute that Fine and Conci will be given the opportunity here. And for Meurensen, Sbaragli will be sitting in the bunch behind and wait and see, surely.
I think that's the only thing that they can do and should do as well with two riders up in this group here. Just lean on Trek Segafredo to do the work in the group behind.
Segafredo, the sponsors, are highly involved in Italian sport at the minute. I noticed the other day they sponsor a basketball team in the Italian league as well now. Of course, their cycling team hasn't had a bad year either. Trek Segafredo, the American team with the Italian co-sponsor, seem to be built on a really solid base, that team. Back into Vicenza. Just down the road from where the organiser Filippo Pozzato is from. And we've seen a lot of this breakaway group. Again, we are told that the peloton is at 55 seconds. I would love to tell you who's working, who's chasing. But for some reason, unfortunately, we cannot see it. We will wait for information. This is that lead group once more with Cron. And the man who is in the break, the French amateur champion Vercher, sits on the back wearing 122. Last little rise this over the motorway bridge. And it's flat on to the finish from there. Well, the bell and the ringer will be getting ready. Just over a kilometre from our final passage of the finish line before the last lap. Second full lap to take on. Around 2.5 circuits that these riders are doing. They came onto the circuit on the plateau, didn't they? After they'd climbed Pirarolo. Vicenza is a decent-sized city, as you can see. Further north from Padova, just to the northwest of Padova, where we started today. It's to the west of Venice itself. And it's the historical capital of this region. Which the region gets its name, the Veneto. This will be the final kilometre. This yet again is the lead group. There is Trentin, Cron just on his wheel. I already talked about the implications for Lotto Soudal of what's about to happen. It's the top team outside of the World Tour. Immediately things might not change too much for them in the first year of the new setup. But they've got to keep going for those points and making sure. Now then, there's gaps approaching here. Again, this is the sort of thing that Magnus was pointing out. It's happened all along the flat. Somebody misses a turn, then a gap opens, and then it has to be closed. There's not full cooperation here, even though they're managed. Well, in a whole lap now, they've not lost a single second, have they? They've actually gained 2. It's 55 seconds the last time we came through the finish line.
I think if you're somewhat unsure of your climbing ability, and you're looking at the likes of Ulissi, the punchy type of climber that he is, together with a few others in this group, you probably would be forgiven to think, okay, I'm just gonna try and sit on, try and save some energy, because even at my very, very best, it's gonna be on the limit for me to possibly follow if they go for a move on the climb. And I do think we will get someone definitely trying. So depending on how you're feeling at this point, or have been feeling over the last 20-30 kilometers, so we got a picture of a peloton.
Here they are. And it looks like it might be Tudor Pro Cycling helping Cofidis to do a bit of the work there, and that is to be applauded. Tudor Pro Cycling, a brand new team, a development team from the 3rd division, taking the responsibility to keep the race alive. Well played.
Well played indeed.
Welcome back to all of you on the television. It's our first look at the peloton in about 35 kilometres, and it's Tudor Pro Cycling who take the bell, taking on the responsibility. They're a brand new team at Tudor. You might not have heard them if you've even been watching quite a lot of the races. We haven't seen them much on the telly. They are a development team from Switzerland who have grand plans, big ambitions. Fabian Cancellara is heavily involved with the squad. They're developing young riders, and there they are, pulling things along as a 3rd division team with just 5 riders on their roster, trying to pull back a group that has former continental champions, some of the biggest names in the sport, Grand Tour stage winners, classics winners in the past. No one else, well, apart from Cofidis just sitting in there, helping them at all.
Well, Yeah, it's fair play to them for taking it on, and I think it's, to me that's part of the development of them as riders. Okay, we found ourselves in this situation. We haven't got a rider in the breakaway. What do we do? And yeah, we take up the chase, and we try to do to do the best that we can, and actually getting the experience of leading a full peloton in a chase like this and taking that responsibility. Is that there's a certain amount of pressure, there's a certain vibe between teammates. There's so many little things that you can learn from doing this particular job right now. So it's not necessarily because they're super confident that they're gonna win the bike race if they do bring the breakaway back. I think it's also part of, if they have a sprinter with them, yeah, he might not be the fastest sprinter yet, but having the team working for him the way that they are, dealing with that sort of pressure, sitting on the wheel, they're now thinking, okay, I'm going to have to get over the climb. I'm going to have to really commit and do the best that I possibly can because my teammates have invested all this energy. So it's not just the pressure that you put on yourself to perform, but it's the pressure of carrying the whole weight of the team and them investing everything that they have to put you in the right place. And there's only one place that you can learn that, and that's in the bike race.
That was the Stadio Romeo Menti of Vicenza Football Club, now operating in the second division of Italian football. As we said, it's cycling for which this region is heavily known as well. It's a big sporting region, actually. One of the top volleyball clubs in the world for a long, long time. Some of the best European basketball clubs come from northeast Italy as well. Soccer, we know, is a huge part of Italian culture, but cycling in the Veneto, a lot of brands from here. And of course, a lot of historic races, of which this has been returned to its rightful place on the calendar last year. The 85th Giro del Veneto. 84th last year, coming back 11 years after the 83rd. It's good to see it back. And well done to the organisers for getting it back. And, well, 45 seconds. This is the lowest the gap has been for some time now.
Yeah, it definitely is. And maybe it is this anticipation of the climb to come that is, making a difference. But also, Tudor are chasing in behind, and they're fully committed here now. 18 kilometers to go. It's all in.
I wonder if Brian Coquard is sitting in that bunch behind still. We haven't had any reports of him. There you go. Well, because if that starts to come down a little more, yes, there's a Cofidis rider in the front, but it's Rémi Rochas. He's not a serial winner, is he, with all respect to him? Certainly in that company, as we get a lovely look at Villa La Rotonda. Those of you who watched the Gravel World Championships at the weekend will have seen that and many other scenic monuments in this part of the world. If you'd like to go back and watch it again, or if you didn't manage to catch it, you can catch it on Discovery Plus and GCN Plus.
Or you have to wait 12 months and see it again next year, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It is going to be on the same parkour, apparently, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure there might be a couple of changes made, but the same organisers for next year. $17 kilometres to go. Trentin.
Not happy with the commitment from these guys.
The radio here. There's the palmarès. Of course, Sandro Meurice winning for the first time for Belgium since the 1970s. Roger de Vlaming had been the last Belgian winner. Of course, we'd had 11 years without a race since Daniel Oss won. The last road race that Daniel Oss won came a year after that as well, in USA Pro Challenge. Filippo Pozzato, now organiser, was the winner at the end of the last decade. .47 seconds, despite the work from behind and the lack of cooperation here. Still not tumbling down that gap. 16 kilometres to go, and the climb is not far from being upon us. There's Robert. Now then, this could be different though, because for the first time there's a real sort of hesitation, and this is the group we wanted to see. So Brian Coquard sitting at the back, still Tudor at the moment riding. Are Cofidis going to start to help them out?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen an awful lot, but if you're looking at how the riders are sitting here, I would suggest that they are already helping.
Here we go. Yes, there's the proof. Of course, we hadn't seen that image for a good 35 kilometres, so we couldn't tell you that. But
it was a
Cofidis and
guesstimation on my part.
No, well done. That's what you're here for. The man with the knowledge. So 45 seconds, is it doable for those behind?
I think it's still doable, yeah. It all depends on how hard they can hit this climb and how much they can bring back on that. And ultimately then what situation that creates from that moment on, because you can't go alone and bridge a gap to a group like this. I think that would be very difficult. So ultimately you're going to need about 10 or 15 very committed riders to come with you and then chase back onto this one. So you need to bring it back to about 15 seconds with a big attack and then have a group that is willing to work to sort of bridge the final 15.
And it's 2 15 riders they're trying to bridge. This is Robert in the original morning breakaway, remember. Front of the race, 15 riders strong, 3 from the morning break. And some big names, the likes of Miguel Angel Lopez coming to the front here on the left-hand side. Andreas Kron sitting 2 wheels behind him. For UAE Emirates, 2 huge names. Serial winners, both Italians. Ulissi the Tuscan, Trentin the man from just up the road from here. And we're at 14 kilometres from the finish. If you're just joining us, this is the 85th edition of the Giro del Veneto, the tour of the Venetian region. It's a one-day race, an historic race that returned to the schedule last year after a decade of an absence. And we're coming up to the final climb to Arcugnano. It's around 3.5 kilometres long, 4.5% the average gradient, with a maximum at 8.5%. Andreas Kron can climb, can finish, and he's just wheeling off the front there as we see movement from behind. The cohesion, if there was any in this group, is slowly starting to seep away.
Definitely is, but I gotta say, Rob, I was surprised to see that image of the peloton and not see Trek Segafredo involved in the chase of that.
And Bardiani as well. I know they've got Tonelli in here, but again, he is not a serial winner. He's a guy who's known for getting out in breakaways and getting the television time. He's an aggressive rider, a helper, isn't he? But back in that team, they've got Filippo Fiorelli, who's a fast finisher, Enrico Battaglin, who's won on these sorts of races before, very much in the style of Diego Ulissi at the Giro d'Italia, no less. And again, if he's still there, we haven't had a good enough look, but a guy who's won World Tour sprints and who is from this region, Sacha Modolo.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess to a certain extent it's the same thing that goes with Iolo Cometa, with Gavazzi back in that group. If he's still there, obviously we haven't seen him, but I think there are better options for them as well.
Cofidis continue to work as Zurlo has gone off on another adventure. Matteo Zurlo, the 24-year-old, racing for the development team Zalf. In the breakaway this morning, he was with 3 other riders, principally Robert and Vercher, with Andrea Pietrobon, who was the first to be dropped. And here he is.
Time gap is coming down quite a bit because the neutral service car has been pulled out the gap, so we're looking at about 30 seconds here now. So unless there is a response from this group to the work that's been done in the peloton, I think we could see some change in this bike race.
Now UAE take control of those behind here. Maybe just trying to play it a bit more tactically. We'd already seen, hadn't we, Trentin try to chat to people and then get angry with people for not doing the work. They obviously want to keep the position they're in, because if you're Trentin and Ulissi, you don't want this group to come back with one, because, you know, you've got 2 of the fastest riders in this group.
Well, yeah, you do. And I think you also don't want to let the sole rider go up the road like this, and you sit and look at each other, and all of a sudden he wins solo. That's handing the race away. So I think that they are taking responsibility of the race, and the fact that they have two of the best riders on this start list, and they're both in this group. So, but I would suggest it's Ulissi who's doing the work, and today with the finish that we have, they would lean towards Trentin, who would be a faster finisher on this type of a run to the line.
And once again, your guesstimation turns out to be perfect. Here is Diego Ulissi, just ahead of Matteo Trentin. Then there's Nathanael Tesfazion, who will start to get excited as well with the fast finish that he has. Nicola Conci sits just behind them. Miguel Angel Lopez, you imagine that he's going to have to try and do something on one of the final ramps. And now sitting at the back, Zurlo, well, that might have just been the last bullet fired from him. He'll try and hang on, and he's doing a decent job at the minute. You just watch that back wheel in front of him, might start to get a little further away.
Yeah, I would suggest, the likes of Miguel Angel Lopez, I'm surprised he hasn't gone already, he hasn't tried already. Waiting to be that close to the top before you do anything, if he's going to do anything. I'm saying probably the same for a rider like Alessandro De Marchi. He would have to go for a bit of a longer move, and if you're going to get rid of all these guys, you need to try on the harder part of the circuit and on the course, and that is now.
On those little couple of ramps that we have, short ramps before the descent, are they hard enough for someone like De Marchi to have a go? As we see Zurlo, not surprising now that he's gone, but he is by far and away the most combative rider of the day. Hat off to you. Now then, we've got our first move. It is Miguel Angel Lopez. Superman, with the cape flapping in the background, is off. And at the minute, he's being followed by Trentin, who looks like he might be able to close him down. De Marchi comes around as well. Rochas is there for Cofidis. And it's certainly breaking things up. And whatever happens, whether Lopez is able to stay away, we're going to have, I think, a new group at the front now, Magnus.
Yeah, I would suggest it would split up a little bit here, and I mean, it's a great position for Matteo Trentin to be in. It's not so great for Lopez and Rochas, and possibly De Marchi also to go away with a rider like Trentin, because that's a difficult nut to beat. But saying that, it's also easier to be in a smaller group like this and launch another attack a little bit later on the flat on the run into the finish, because there's only so many attacks that a rider like Trentin can respond to and still have his sprint at the finish.
And we saw that last year in these couple of races, because Trentin was involved in the shake-up in both of them, in the group that made the selection. First the Giro del Veneto, then the Veneto Classic, the new race that we'll see on Sunday, and he didn't win either of them. No,
it is very difficult to deal with a small group of riders who start attacking, and when you look at the composition of this group out front here now, they have to hit each other. Interesting to see that Tesfazion has missed the final little move again.
Yeah, something for him maybe to work on. He's obviously very strong, he's obviously hugely talented. We saw him good in the Giro d'Italia, going in breakaways and just missing out in the end, didn't we? I think the day that he could have been up there towards the end was the day he crashed. He had a really shocking crash on a descent. As we've seen Trentin follow Rochas, who looks strong here, Lopez, De Marchi, and here is Tesfazion. Of course, Ulissi is going to be able to use the excuse now that he's got his mate up the road, and he's going to sit in this group.
It looks like there's a small group on their way up to our leaders as well.
Just under 10 Ks to go. Well played to Verchel. Morning breakaway.
Handy bike rider, that.
5 riders at the front, and 21-year-old French amateur champion Matteo Verchel, who's going to turn professional at the end of this season, was in the morning breakaway and is now in the mix in the front group. He's there with Alessandro De Marchi, who's fighting to stay in the professional ranks and looking for a new contract. Matteo Trentin, the former European champion and winner of Grand Tour stages at the biggest races. Miguel Angel Lopez at the back here, probably the odd one out. He is the GC contender here, looking to try and do something on one of these ramps. And Rémi Rochas, the Frenchman for Cofidis, 5 riders at the front. They've got a minute on the peloton. They've got a small gap on those they've just left behind, and they're working fairly well together here.
I was just looking at the way Lopez came back onto the group there. I was thinking, is he gonna time this one so that the front of the group are just starting to feel the gradient just as he's coming with speed from behind, and then hit them again, but he decided not to.
Mercier on the left-hand side. Just in the drops there. What's left in the tank for him? Again, have been a tremendous ride. Somebody to watch already next year, as there's a little bit of hesitation now. Of course, none of them want to give Matteo Trentin a free ride to the finish, and that is something that could be the problem here.
Looking at Trentino, he still looks very much in control of his effort here, so I think he's got good legs on him. Jay Vine has gone out of this group. I think he's actually somewhere in between these two.
This is his teammate Nicola Conci. Back to the front. A couple of ramps still to climb. We're seeing a gap timed at 14 seconds. It's not done yet. Certainly if they all look at Matteo Trentin, he'll get fed up of doing all the work after a little while, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
Okay, movement left and right. We've got a move here, and it's come from De Marchi. Doesn't manage to really put anybody under pressure, and slots again in the back. There's that little acceleration, wasn't there? And he and Trentin had a small gap, about a wheel and a half. And then you can see the group behind here. There's Rochas now being chased by Cron. Ulissi in a good position, just able to sit on the wheel.
Yeah, Ulissi isn't going to do anything or go anywhere. He'll just sit there and then follow the wheel off to one side when they do decide to change on the front, and that tends to slow the chase down quite a bit. I was going to say, for a rider like Trentin coming into to the final here on the flat, the one thing he really has to be very aware of is the attacks that are coming, and not hesitate to jump straight on them with his acceleration. If you leave a meter's gap, that's too much. You've got to step straight onto the wheel without hesitation. Even if you're thinking, I'm having to close too many of these gaps, I want someone else to take it, don't hesitate to do that effort, because ultimately the effort to close a bigger gap is harder to do, especially when you're a rider who sits with so much more pure acceleration than the rest of the riders in this group. You just got to trust that you have enough of those accelerations in you to be able to shut down the gap every time.
How does someone like Miguel Angel Lopez win from here now?
I'd say lay off the back, and I mean off the back of the group by 10, 15, 20 meters, and if there is a couple of attacks and the group sort of hesitates at one point just as they're catching one rider, that's when you make the run at it and use that slingshot to accelerate and go down the road. But you can't be the first one to go. You have to sort of gamble on, make a calculated gamble, we should say, on that. The one rider that goes, we're going to be able to bring him back. Maybe even the second one, depending on what the group looks like. And then you put it down.
One call I think we probably can make now, Magnus. Please tell me if you disagree, but the peloton at 1 minute and 5, probably out of it now.
Yeah, they're out of it with 5.7 kilometers to go. That is, with the best will in the world, impossible to close.
They've missed their opportunity.
Unless it was uphill. Unless it was uphill.
It's very much downhill and flat. That's the problem for the peloton. And we're getting inside the city as well, where there's lefts and rights. A little more difficult to close down. There's 12 seconds from these 5-star riders at the front to the ones who were in the breakaway with them before. There's Alessandro De Marchi. How he would love a victory. Still looking for a contract for next year. Fighting away, wasn't he, in the breakaway in the Giro di Lombardia on Saturday. Racing well and very competitively and combatively at the first Gravel World Championships too. Here's the gap on the road when they get past the sanctuary. It's still decent, isn't it? 15 seconds. I think now with the gap we're seeing behind, the peloton are sitting up a little. They've realised. Time to descend, the climbs are done. That's it. It's Lopez, Demarchi, Rochas, Verscher, who's a new name to many of us, the French amateur champion, alongside Matteo Trentin. 16 seconds they're gaining. An unlikely mix of riders at the end of what's been an aggressive race. Been a big few days of racing already in the Venetian region. We have the Giro del Veneto today finishing in Vicenza. The Venetia Classic at the weekend. This is Rémi Rochas racing for Cofidis. Frenchman who is 26 years of age, who has never won a bike race. Today is his grand opportunity. He's racing, though, against a man who's won many bike races in Matteo Trentin. 28 of them, to be precise, including 3 stages at the Tour de France and 4 at the Vuelta a España. There's Matteo Verscher, who's yet to win against the professionals, but he has a national jersey picked up in the French amateur ranks this year. There's Alessandro Demarchi, who's taken some big victories in his career. Not numerous, but 6 big ones, including 3 at the Vuelta a España. And Miguel Angel Lopez, who's not quite on his terrain here, but 22 victories, including GC successes at World Tour level, Grand Tour stages at the Tour, and of course at the Vuelta a España. It's a big ask, certainly, for those 2 from France who have never ever won before.
And I think the running here is actually almost too fast to make a really good attack on. It's slightly downhill until we got that little bridge up over the railway. That I think is probably the only real launch point. And the faster it goes, the harder it is to make a difference. So right now it's really playing into the hands of Matteo Trentin here.
Trentin still at the front and in the deluxe, almost glorious position. He would have certainly signed for this at the start of the day, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah.
2.2 kilometres to go over this final little climb. And no surprise that Miguel Angel Lopez gives it a go, tries to put everybody on the limit. And he's got a little bit of a gap there from Demarchi, with Trentin following so well. And Trentin, he looks brilliant, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. And I mean, these are the type of climbs that Trentin, he does them so well. He's punchy enough, and has got such a good acceleration that he can do them all day long. But now here comes the difficulty. Now, where does he position himself in the best possible way to make sure he doesn't get surprised by anyone?
Bit of deja vu for him last year to the 2 races in the Veneto last year, in the Giro del Veneto and the Veneto Classic, where he was in those positions, but in the end he was done for. They outfoxed him. Look at Demarchi, he's weighing it up here, just sitting off the back. He's surely going to have to try and take his chance. Coming up to 1.4 Ks to go. And there is Alessandro Demarchi. Left-hand side, Trentin is going to close this, or at least try. First attack coming from Demarchi. And it looks as though everybody can follow as we go into the Flamme Rouge now.
It did exactly the right thing there. Trentin didn't hesitate, straight onto the wheel in the slipstream. That was the easiest way to deal with that attack.
900 metres to the finish line. It will be contested between these 5 riders now, with a 14-second gap to the next group behind. Demarchi at the front in the blue and white. Just behind him in the white, red and black, you can see Trentin. Here goes Rochas now, the Frenchman who's yet to ever win a bike race in the red and white. Trentin is on him. What's left in the tank for Demarchi? I'm not sure if there's too much or enough really, because Lopez is there, Verscher is there. It's Trentin who's waiting on the wheel now, and almost being given a lead out here by Rochas.
Rochas is just going to commit to this one now, because this is a good opportunity for him to get a second place at least. But I think winning out of this will be difficult for Matteo Trentin. Yeah, come around this corner here now, and he's in the driving seat.
Be given an armchair ride here into the final 200 metres. He comes on the inside of the corner and launches himself. It's Matteo Trentin who's there at the front. He has his gap. He looks around and sees it. Trentin knows he has it. He's going to be able to celebrate. This year it's his. Matteo Trentin is the winner of the Giro del Veneto. It's a dominant performance with Rochas in second place, Verscher and Lopez going for the final place on the podium, and then in fifth you had Demarchi, the man who really went for the attack at 1 kilometre to go. UAE trying to win the sprint from behind as well. You can see Conchi trying to get the better of Ulissi. They can't do it. Double domination from UAE Emirates. It's Trentin winning the sprint for the race, and behind his mate who helped to set it up, winning for the minor places. Tremendous from Trentin. They worked him over 12 months ago. He was not making that mistake again. That's a super win.
It is a super win. Just really well played on those two attacks that he had to cover, and just jumping straight on the wheel and gapping the riders behind him as he did that move as well. That was first class.
And here comes what's left of the peloton. And it's going to be an opportunity to sprint for minor places. It looks as though Lipinj is up there for Trek Segafredo, Latvian champion, and he'll be the one to take it. Well, they missed the move. We didn't see them for a long time. They were chasing for a long time to no success. Probably not enough teams to commit it. And this man, once he made it. He made the difference, looked strong on the climbs, fast in the finish. His race management was exemplary, wasn't it?
Well, I think the way that you can see him reacting so quickly to these attacks, and especially the last one from Rochas, everyone else is looking around, and Trentin just didn't hesitate. Got himself onto Rochas, who was clearly committed to carrying on and securing himself at least a second place, which, you know, fair play to him for doing that. But he had nothing to really put against Matteo Trentin.
Trentin, the winner of the Giro del Veneto, and able to celebrate. Win number 23 of what has been an exceptional career to date. And once again, finishing the season strongly. First year in his career for quite a while where he hasn't ridden the Grand Tour. But he's certainly able to go for his results. He was due to ride the Tour de France, let's not forget. COVID positive denying him that. Finishes first, Rochas second. I think that was Verscher, by the way, who did get third place down. What a result that is from the morning breakaway as well. Man, destined for great things, maybe.
Brilliant ride. You know, to have the legs to follow at that point when you've been in the morning breakaway for such a long time, and, you know, spotting the right move to go with as well. Good on him.
Trentin, Rochas, Verscher with Lopez and Demarchi in the top five. Well, this is how it started just after lunchtime. Shorter race towards the end of the year. Distance is coming down now after the last monument of the season. 160 kilometres on the menu. Flat start and some hills in the second half that would see attacks, and eventually the race decided. Towards the end of what was left of the breakaway, three riders who would still be a part of the lead group for a long time, looking really good. Zurlo going away for a while. Verscher, who already shown in amateur circles that he can win races. French national champion. sitting in this group. Robert, former winner of Noka, the Kursa from the breakaway, was doing the same. Peloton at this point were still within a chance of bringing it back, but not enough committal. Good section of teams represented in the front will have also contributed to that. Jay Vine did quite a bit of work, didn't he, to keep the gap out there in his head, as did both Trentin and Ulissi at different points. Miguel Angel Lopez committing a lot of energy too. As it came to the last lap, Zurlo would be brought back by Ulissi in what was a brilliant team effort for UAE Emirates. And when Miguel Angel Lopez attacked, Trentin would be the man to follow. Trentin sticking in this group, helping to organise it, and playing everything perfectly. 2 attacks he had to respond to, taking the last turn on the inside after almost a lead out, really. Rochas taking a good second place. Trentin not even having to really sprint for it. And the third place going to young 21-year-old Matteo Verscher, who I'm sure we'll be hearing much more of when he turns professional at the end of this year. And it's 33-year-old Matteo Trentin who wins the Giro del Veneto and adds himself to a list of winners that includes a lot of the greats.
Yeah, we do straight away.
And it sounds as though we might better hear from him. Or at least in a moment's time. Well, not the biggest race of his career, Magnus, but certainly a really impressive one. And he's just been solid again all year, hasn't he?
He has been, and I think that's the one thing that he's turned out to be is really solid throughout the whole season, and even in the final races of the year, he's still there, he's still motivated, and with good legs on him. You know, it's good to see a rider like that.
Well, he started the year by winning Le Semin, a race that you know very well as a former winner.
Yeah.
And he's finishing the year by winning at the Giro del Veneto. Yet to wait to see if he'll race on Sunday at the Veneto Classic, but in this form, I'd be surprised if he doesn't turn up.
Yeah, you'd expect most of the guys who are on the start line today to be there on Sunday as well.
And one will be there who's on Sunday will be Davide Rebellin, riding for the final time as a road professional, 51 years of age.
It will work out 30-year-long career.
Exactly. He began in the same year that our esteemed colleague, Mr. Kelly, won his last Sanremo. 1992. More about Davide Rebellin, I think, on Sunday.
That was my first year junior.
I was still at primary school. Yes, Davide Rebellin with a very long career, and we'll talk about him more, I'm sure, on Sunday. Today, it's all been about Matteo Trentin. Trentin wins the Giro del Veneto ahead of Rémi Rochas and Matteo Verscher. Miguel Angel Lopez in fourth, Alessandro De Marchi fifth, Ulissi, Conchi, Bais, Balmer and Kron all completing a really good top 10. But Trentin the best and head and shoulders above the rest.